The father's justice. Matthew, I just need one night, without you. Amanda said it while standing near the living room window, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the curtain as if it gave her something to hold on to. The soft yellow light from the lamp beside the couch filled the room, warm and familiar, the same light we had sat under for years, and yet something in it felt different now. I was on the couch, leaning forward slightly, my hands resting on my knees, still holding the remote I hadn't used in minutes. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at her, trying to understand how a sentence that simple could feel like being pushed out of my own life. "What do you mean, one night, without me?" I asked, my voice quieter than I expected. She didn't turn immediately. She took a breath first, slow, measured, then faced me with an expression that wasn't angry, just certain. "It's not a big deal, Matthew. I just want to do something different this year." The words hung there, heavier than they should have been. I glanced around the room, the folded blanket on the armrest, the glass of water on the table, the faint reflection of us in the dark window. Everything looked exactly the same. Except now I felt like I didn't belong in it. Different. Without me? I pressed, trying to keep my tone steady. She gave a small shrug, as she had already settled this in her mind. "You wouldn't enjoy it anyway." That was the moment it shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet realization settling in as something had already moved past the point of discussion, and I was only now catching up. She asked if she could go to her parents' place for New Year's Eve. "Just for a couple of days," Amanda said, already moving toward the hallway closet, before I could fully respond. I watched her pull out a small suitcase, placing it on the bed with a quiet thud. The zipper sound cut through the room as she began folding clothes, one piece at a time, as this had already been decided. "We always spend New Year's together," I said, standing by the doorframe, my hand resting against the wood. She didn't look up. "We haven't seen them much this year. It's not a big deal," she replied, smoothing out a sweater before placing it inside. "It is a big deal," I answered, stepping closer. "We had plans. The river, the fireworks." She exhaled, a little sharper this time, finally meeting my eyes. "Matthew, you don't even enjoy those things. Why does it matter now?" The room felt tighter somehow. "Because it's what we do," I said. She shook her head, closing the suitcase halfway. "Or maybe it's just what you expect." That landed harder than I thought. I didn't raise my voice, but something in me shifted. So now I'm controlling for wanting to spend New Year's with my wife? She didn't answer directly. She just zipped the bag shut, the sound final, then reached for her coat. "I'll be back in a few days," she said, already heading for the door. I stood there as it opened, then closed, and for the first time, the silence felt unfamiliar, like something didn't quite fit. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while I was rinsing a glass, the sound sharp in the quiet of the house. I dried my hand on a towel and picked it up. A message from Justin Parker. "Hey man, are you and Amanda coming down for New Year's?" I leaned against the counter, typing back without thinking too much. "She's already there. I'm staying back this year." The reply came almost immediately, the 3 dots barely pausing before the message appeared. "That's strange. I was at her parents' place earlier today. They didn't mention her being there." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the edge of the phone. The kitchen light flickered slightly above me, casting a dull reflection across the countertop. "What do you mean?" I typed. Justin answered, slower this time. I spoke to them for a bit. They said they were spending New Year's alone. The glass slipped slightly in my hand, tapping against the sink. I set it down carefully, my eyes still fixed on the message. Something didn't line up. Not the timing, not the story, not any of it. I read the messages again, slower now, each word settling the second time differently. If she wasn't there, then where was she? I didn't call her, not that night, not the next morning. The phone stayed on the table, screen dark, as I moved around the house in a quiet routine that felt almost deliberate. Coffee brewed, sat untouched. The chair across from me remained empty. Every instinct said to confront her, to demand an explanation, but something held me back. When trust cracks like that, explanations don't fix it. They only cover it. What I needed wasn't her version. I needed the truth. I sat at the kitchen table, the overhead light casting a steady circle across the wood, and searched for a number I never thought I'd use. A private investigator. My fingers hovered for a second before I pressed call. The conversation was brief, practical, no drama, just details. Her name, her last known location, the timeline. Within an hour, it was set. Someone else would watch. Follow. Confirm. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly, feeling the shift happen inside me. This wasn't about suspicion anymore. This was about control, about not being the last one to know what was happening in my own life. Silence isn't weakness, it's preparation. And now, I was waiting for the first piece of real evidence to come back. The call came in just after sunset, the sky outside my window fading into a dull gray as the streetlights flickered on one by one. I picked up on the second ring, stepping away from the window as the investigator spoke in a low, steady tone. I found her. She's at Brittany Clark's place. I stopped in the middle of the room, the words settling in slower than they should have. Brittany Clark. Of course. I glanced toward the counter, where Amanda's coffee mug still sat from a few mornings ago, untouched since she left. Brittany had always been part of the background noise in our lives, the friend I never quite trusted, the one Amanda always defended without hesitation. There was always something off, not obvious, just enough to make you question things you couldn't prove. She hasn't left yet, the investigator added. I walked over to the chair and pulled it back slowly, the legs scraping softly against the floor. Stay on her, I said, my voice even. If she goes anywhere, you follow. There was a brief pause on the other end before he confirmed. I ended the call and stood there for a moment, staring at nothing in particular. The uneasiness I'd been holding on to was shifting now, settling into something heavier, more certain. This wasn't just a lie anymore. It was a pattern, one I had been ignoring for too long. I reached for my keys, then stopped, placing them back down on the table instead. Not yet. I needed to see where this was going, because whatever came next, it wouldn't be random. The update came late in the evening, just as the street outside had gone quiet, and the only light in the house was the dim glow from the lamp near the couch. I answered immediately, pressing the phone closer to my ear as the investigator spoke. They just left, Amanda and Brittany. They got into her car and drove about 20 minutes. I followed. I was already reaching for my jacket. Where are they now? A private house. There are cars lined up outside. Couples, individuals, people going in. By the time I got there, the air felt colder than it should have been. The house sat at the end of the street, lights on but curtains drawn, the kind of place that didn't invite attention. People were walking in quietly, some laughing too loudly, others avoiding eye contact as they passed through the front door. Nothing about it felt open. Everything about it felt hidden. I pulled up next to the investigator, rolling down my window. What is this? He hesitated for a second. It's not a normal party. I went in for a few minutes. It's a swingers gathering. The words didn't land right away. I stared at the front door, watching it open and close, people disappearing inside like it was routine. My hand tightened on the steering wheel, then loosened again. Open the back, I said. He moved quickly, leading me through a side entrance. The inside was warmer, the air thick, low music playing somewhere in the background. Groups of people stood in corners, talking in close circles, glancing at each other with a kind of understanding that didn't need to be explained. I kept my head down, following him through a narrow hallway, each step heavier than the last. They're in the second room, he whispered. I stopped in front of the door for half a second, then pushed it open. Everything after that blurred into a single moment. Amanda, there, in a space I didn't recognize, surrounded by people who didn't belong in our life, or maybe never did. My heart was pounding so hard, I could hear it over the music. The room felt smaller, the air tighter, like something had been pulled out from under me without warning. I didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there as the reality settled in front of me, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to question. And in that silence, one thought kept repeating, quieter than everything else. How long had this been happening? She froze the moment she saw me, her hand still mid-movement, as if she had forgotten what she was doing. For a second, there was nothing. Just the low hum of music from the other room and the faint sound of someone laughing down the hall. Then she moved quickly, grabbing at the nearest piece of clothing, her voice sharp and uneven. "Matthew, what are you doing here?" I didn't step closer. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood there, looking at her as she tried to compose herself. "This is what you meant by going to your parents' place?" I asked, each word measured, steady. She hesitated, then straightened, her expression shifting almost visibly. The panic didn't disappear. It just settled into something firmer. "It's not what you think," she said at first, but the words didn't hold for long. She exhaled and shook her head. "Actually, no, it is. But it's not a big deal." I felt something drop inside me, quiet but final. "Not a big deal? It's just one night, Matthew. It doesn't mean anything," she replied, pulling her arms around herself, not to cover up, but like she was bracing for a conversation she had already rehearsed. I took a step back, my hand brushing against the wall. "You lied. You disappeared. And this is nothing?" Her eyes hardened at that. "You've been distant for months," she said, her tone sharpening. "You're always working, always somewhere else, even when you're home." I needed something different. The room felt smaller with every word. "So this is your solution?" "I tried to talk to you," she shot back, her voice rising just enough to cut through the tension. "You don't listen. You don't see me anymore. I wanted to feel something again, and you weren't giving me that." I didn't respond right away. I watched her, really watched her, the way she stood there, not apologizing, not even hesitating, just explaining, like this was a reasonable conclusion. And that's when it settled in. This wasn't just about what she did. It was how little it seemed to matter to her. So I asked the only thing left that made sense. "And you really believe this doesn't change anything?" I didn't argue after that. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been broken. I looked at her for a moment longer, then shook my head slowly. "We're done," I said, my voice steady, almost quieter than before. The words didn't echo. They just settled, like something that had already been decided long before I spoke it out loud. She stared at me, blinking as if she hadn't expected it to go that far. "Matthew, don't do this," she said, taking a step closer, but I moved back just enough to keep the distance. "No," I replied, reaching for the door behind me. "You already did." The hallway felt colder as I walked out, the air sharper against my skin. I didn't look back. I just kept moving, each step more certain than the last. By the time I reached the car, my hands had stopped shaking. The next morning, the house was quiet again, but this time, it didn't feel empty. I pulled a suitcase from the closet, set it on the bed, and began folding her clothes one by one. No rush, no hesitation, just methodical, like finishing something that needed to be done. Her phone calls started before noon. I watched the screen light up, then go dark again. I didn't answer. Not once. And as the room filled with the soft sound of fabric folding and zippers closing, I realized this wasn't about pain anymore. It was about what came next. A few days later, I sat across from my lawyer in a quiet office, the blinds half closed, thin lines of light stretching across the desk. The papers were already prepared. All that was left was my signature. I picked up the pen, paused for a second, then signed my name without hesitation. It wasn't anger anymore, just clarity. Amanda didn't fight it. No calls from her lawyer, no requests, no negotiations. The silence on her side said more than anything she could have argued. When the final documents came through, everything was clean. No shared assets contested, no demands, no attempts to hold on. I remember standing in the living room that evening, the same place where everything had started, looking at the empty space where her things used to be. The light was different now, cooler, sharper, but steady. And for the first time in a while, it felt like I could breathe without something pressing on my chest. That's when it became clear. Betrayal isn't a mistake that happens in a moment. It's a choice, one decision followed by another, each step taken knowing exactly what it could cost. Trust works the same way. You build it slowly, day by day. And when it's broken, it doesn't come back the same, no matter how much you want it to. What I learned through all of this is simple. Your value doesn't come from holding on to someone who's willing to lose you. It comes from knowing when to walk away, even when it hurts. So if you've ever found yourself in a place like this, where the truth changes everything, what would you do? Would you stay and try to fix it, or would you choose to leave?